Here we go. So you heard me say that the annual IEP review of goals doth not a progress monitoring event matter. Yes, there must be an annual evaluation as to whether or not the annual goal and objective, if we have kids with moderate severe, have been met. But you don't want to wait till the end of a year on your treatment plan to determine whether or not a goal was met. So we want to be looking, and the law changed. Remember, we used to do annual IEP, and then we moved in 04 to, was it 04 or 07? I think 04. IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, we moved into you have to report to the parents at least as often as is reported for kids without disabilities, right? And so that sort of gave birth to the every quarter we do a note home on whether or not you're on pathway to meeting your goal when the annual comes up. That's because federal recognized that waiting a year is a tad long. In the it was 04, because then in 07 they took out that clause and they put it in commentary, and they said that of course we are on a regular basis informing parents all through that year how it's going. So how many of us are reporting on special ed reporting cards of some sort progress on a 9-week basis, which is about every quarter? 9-week basis? What happened to this side of the room? 9-week basis report? 6 weeks. Okay, great. So the issue is it's no longer annual goals by themselves that will document that some educational benefit is occurring. Every attorney is looking, that represents families, is looking to determine whether or not some educational benefit occurred as a result of this IEP. And remember, in the Raleigh decision, they said some educational benefit, not maximum. They said you had to give a serviceable Chevy. That's exactly what the judge called it. A serviceable Chevy, not a Cadillac. They'd change the brands, I'm sure, if they were ruling today. So how do we document some educational benefit to show that FAPE in the LRE is occurring? That's through good progress monitoring. So let's take a look at progress monitoring as a concept and how to do it or lose it. Remember, assessment in general has 4 major areas. It's screening, diagnosis, progress monitoring, and evaluation. So that's what we're about when we're looking at outcomes for kids. And the National Center on Response to Intervention is emphasizing is the intervention working, and the screening, who needs help. So what's the benefits of progress monitoring? Well, it makes sure that we're making good use of our time and resources, that we're basing our decisions on data and not on hunches, not guesses, not gut feelings, not reputations, and not perceptions. Think about it. When we get together to talk about whether the child met their goals, how many of us are making decisions based on actual data? Many of us are just kind of winging it. On a scale of 1 to 3, my district primarily wings it, and we do hunches and best guesses and perceptions. That's a 1. Well, we look at a little bit of data, like we look at permanent products and the kind of work kids done. Or 3, we are looking at graph response data. Show me what we've got. Hunches, a few little thingies, or graph data. Okay, normal curve distribution, just like in the earlier voting. So this is going to lead to improved outcomes if we really use progress monitoring. Remember, formative evaluation, graphing, and feedback, 1.2, evidence-based. So you're going to have objective and defensible data as well. You win in any kind of altercation about some educational benefit if you can present graph data. And that's one of the reasons why we have a new graphing program that just went up on the PENT website. Even I could do it, meaning construct an Excel spreadsheet that progress monitors and establishes effect size. It will make sure that people follow through with an intervention as well. And trust me, at NASP, that was the big buzz. What are the ways that we can better progress monitor? So there's been a lot of meta-analyses of studies looking at progress monitoring, and the Fuchs started this in 1987. No, that's not the last research on it. I just wanted to show that that's when it all started. The results indicate that progress monitoring is associated with large improvements in student learning, and the magnitude of the effect is enhanced when you're using behavioral techniques, when database decision rules are being used, and when students are incorporating into their own graphing and monitoring process. That's why San Francisco wants their ED population to participate in their own graphing at the end of each interval, and they're doing a stellar job in doing that. So progress monitoring is for all students who receive Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. If they're only receiving Tier 1, your progress monitoring is what? Their academic performance. How did they do? You select the tool when you match the student to the intervention. You don't wait and do the intervention for a few weeks and then say, oh gee, how are we going to evaluate it? You graph your data and include the student whenever you can. So what are the types of progress monitoring data that we might get? Well, there's existing data, removals. How many times is the child out of the class? Or how many times were they referred to the office? That data is already there. Or suspension or attendance. But I've noticed a trend, I don't know if you've noticed it. When you start looking at office referrals, everybody knows you want your office referrals to go down, right? So I've noticed a trend around the country. We don't send them to the office. We send them to the buddy teacher. And he goes over to the buddy teacher and grows grass in the back of the room. He's been removed from an education. We keep no data on the removal, but oh hey, our office referrals have gone way down. How many of you suspect that in another place far, far away from your home, that might be occurring? So beware the Ides of March. If your office referrals are going down, does that mean children are being removed less? Some people are removing directly to the adjustment center, or they're going directly to wait in a line outside the counselor's office to be counseled out of their problems. And it's flying below the radar of your existing data. So let's take a look at these tools and what they might bring to us. We know that existing data is easy. It's called permanent product. So the advantage is it's already available, it's very contextually relevant, and it's a natural occurrence so people don't overreact to it. We know that. When we look at existing data, we have our office discipline referrals, our attendance and tardy records, suspension, expulsion, and data from existing behavior plans. So if you have a token economy, how many tokens did the student earn? But let's think outside the box. Let's think about direct behavior rating. And direct behavior rating is a tool that involves a very brief rating of a target behavior following a specified observation period. So it might be a class activity by persons who are naturally there. And so we have our behavior report cards, our homeschool notes, our daily progress reports, and our good behavioral notes that we can use. Because with direct behavior rating, we're looking at three primary areas. We're looking at how academically engaged was the student, how respectful was the student, and to what extent did the student refrain from disruptive behavior. And that's going to give us, in direct behavior rating, a lot of pithy information. So in our handouts, we have a variety of tools. Let's go and take a peek at them. So if you will turn to let's turn to page 12. A lot of people think that collecting data is like having the teacher repeatedly complete the Achenbach. No, that's called overkill. That's not a progress monitoring tool. That's an assessment system. So in this little handout on direct behavior rating, there's an overview for teachers. Turn the next page. Notice that in example number 1, Mrs. Smith is estimating the percentage of time that Emily displayed disruptive behavior during math. And so it was between 10 and 10:45, and she's estimating the percentage was 35% of the time. Well, isn't that subjective? Yes, but when you monitor class after class, you're going to see whether or not the intervention is having an effect. So the scale may be skewed, and Ms. Wright may be over or underestimating, but because you're repeating it day after day. How many data points will you want? Not 4 days, 4 weeks, right? When we look at data points, we're thinking in weeks, we're not thinking in days. 4 days is not enough to evaluate problem behavior because we have honeymoon periods. Have you heard of those? And then we have kids who are treatment resistors until the last minute, and then finally they go, oh yeah, this class really is consistent, isn't it? And then they change their behavior. Notice on example 2, Mr. Green is estimating the intensity of the disruptive behavior, and then in example 3, the percentage of time in a particular behavior is monitored. So what are the types of direct behavior rating scales that we could develop? Take a look at the next page, which is page 14. You could do it for on task, for raises hand, for keeps your hands to yourself, uses appropriate voice, and you'd have to define that better. Compliance, disruption, verbal aggression, physical aggression, non-compliance, crying, but you have to operationalize those. So let's take a look now on page 15 and page 16. And 17 for that matter. So we're looking at how do you complete a direct behavior rating. So what you're doing is you are completing the form, you are defining an observation period and an activity, and then you determine, are you going to rate frequency, duration, or intensity, and then immediately after the observation, you rate the behavior. Who rates the behavior? Well, if you were sitting in the back of the room, you could rate it to get a nice baseline. You could ask a paraeducator to rate it. You could ask a teacher to rate it. So if you look at the following page, there's one on academic engagement, there's one on respectful, and there's one on disruptive behavior, and then you can always have an optional behavior as well. So at your table, discuss what relevance is there to having a daily direct behavior rating. In my practice with some of the kids I know who either have a behavior plan or at risk for needing a behavior plan or have a tier 2 intervention or at risk for needing one. Go ahead and spend 5 minutes talking about it at your table. Okay, so how do you get people to do this stuff? That's the issue that always comes up, right? So here's where your power of persuasion comes in. How do we persuade people to do stuff that we want them to do? If you read The Science of Persuasion by Cipriani, you will find that Persuasion occurs in the context of reinforcement combined with rationale. And the study I love is the airplane line study. I think it's because I've been in a lot of airplane lines in the last 7 years. So what they studied is what are people's reactions to someone who pushes ahead in the TSA line. So here's this person, and they come through and they say, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me. People get mad, and they block them from going through. Okay, here comes the person who comes along and says, excuse me, oh thank you, excuse me, oh thank you, I'm going to miss my plane, oh thank you. And what did they discover? People part, and that person runs all the way up to the front, right? Reinforcement combined with rationale. Then they did the third piece, which I loved, which was they didn't even give a good rationale. What they said was, excuse me, oh thank you, excuse me, I've got to get through. Oh excuse me, thank you, I've got to get through. And everybody thought, well, there must be a good reason. So, if you want people to do stuff, you have to be a reinforcing agent. How do you become a reinforcing agent? For one, smile. Literally, smile. If you smile, it activates the neurons in the observer's mind so that their positive pathways are lit up. If you go in to consult with your consultee looking like you're either going to kill them or they're going to kill you, then you're not going to have the same response. So smile and be a reinforcer. Shape in the direction of change. Point out the good stuff, even if you have to scramble for it. Point out the good stuff and give rationales. And I also know that you always pair, and we know this from discriminative learning, you always pair the example with the non-example. So I'm going to say this rating that we're going to do, this direct behavior rating, takes on average 30 seconds. Another method of documenting would be where you write me a paragraph at the end of each interval on how the child did today. And I can gather the data to graph it either way. Which would you prefer? And what's the likely selection? I'll take the 30-second, put the dot on the page. There are barriers. One of the barriers is our beliefs. Our beliefs that I shouldn't have to do this. It's not my job to collect data. It's my job to teach. Is a dying sport. It is our job in a data-driven area to document that children are learning, children are progressing. So there's still the cell, and we'll be talking more about the cell later. Let's take a look at ones we haven't looked at in this handout, and I somehow got them a little out of sequence. Take a look at page 19. And in the TIERS behavior, in the TIERS progress monitoring tool that's described on page 19, you are doing a whole screen on the student. So you select from the scales or use all the scales on page 20. So let's take a look at this. So here you're looking at on-task behavior, pro-social behavior, disruptive behavior, negative social interactions, destructive or dangerous behavior, and individualized behavior. You can fill out the whole form. You can fill out portions of the form. So you're not just doing one dot, you're doing multiples. And for our kiddos who use a lot of externalizing behaviors, this can be really helpful in documenting what you're doing. And with that, let's take a look at point sheets, and then we'll have our afternoon break. So on a point sheet is used to award points to the student for exhibiting particular targeted behaviors. We always want to state our behaviors positively. Kafudi. Anybody know what that means? Keep your hands, feet, and other objects to yourself. Kafudi. That's the definition of safe, isn't it? Keep, K, Y, your, H, hands, F, feet, other objects, O, T, to yourself. Young children love kafudi. How were you today? Oh, I was kafudi. I kept my hands, feet, and other objects to myself. So safe, respectful, and responsible. You look at your time intervals to deliver points. And so those points are delivered in naturally occurring intervals. It could be every 30 minutes, every period. It could be twice daily. You look at the age of the child and the extent to which you need this data. Then you look at the percentage of total points used as a basis to track student progress over time. So you use that percentage of total points then to develop a goal. So your goal is 100% safe, 80% respectful, and 75% responsible, for example. I did see a behavior plan not long ago that said that the student would reduce punching holes in the school bus tires to less than twice a month. I honestly believe we could take that one to a 0, right? So we're looking at aggregating points. So I want you to look at this form and let me go over it, and then we'll have our afternoon break before we go into really the most valuable thing I have to say today. So on your point sheet, it's on page 18. So here's how this works. What you're doing is you are determining the length of the interval, and in each interval, at the end of the interval, you are determining how many points the student earned. So did they earn 0, 1, 2, or 3? Or you can do a 0, 1, 2 as well. And those are your interval debriefs with the student. And when we're looking at children with emotional disturbance or a class that needs a high amount of feedback, this can be really valuable. So look at the scale. And this comes from West San Gabriel Valley, and this is an ED program that I've been working with. So 0 says sustained problem, need for more than one teaching interaction. And a teaching interaction is a corrective procedure. 1 is you gave a teaching interaction, but the student complied, so they maintained 1 point. 2 is you had to use cues or prompts or redirection, but the student complied. And 3 is they didn't need a prompt, a cue, or a redirection. The student just maintained for the interval. So you're collecting all this data. You could use bus riding as an interval if you wanted to. You could have the interval of riding the bus to school safely, respectfully, and responsibly, and that counts toward daily totals as well. You have to have a payoff for it, and in the ED programs I work, you pay off by getting access to honors room or honors outing if you are at the next level. And Sam, how's this working out in San Francisco in some of your ED classes who are doing points and levels? Let me just put you right on the spot.
The classrooms that are using this, I'll give you an example. There was one school that has 2 classes, like a K2 and a 3-5.
So K2 and 3-5.
One of the teachers was using it consistently, but the other teacher wasn't. The other teacher started using it and immediately saw the outcome and is now telling other teachers that they should really be doing this. So
Right.
the sites where they're doing it is really successful. At the sites where they aren't, they're having a tough time wrapping their head around, if I do all this work, where is it going to get me?
Right. It's that belief and buy-in piece. Sam is in charge of the ED programs for San Francisco. You know, little tiny job that he's recently taken on. So intervals are important. However, if you waited to the end of each interval to debrief with the student, for some student it's not enough. Have you ever heard of that attention bucket theory? That some kids have different attention bucket sizes and that some kids need more feedback That's why you have the bonus points. And in the bonus points, you go into the interval and give a bonus point in the category that you're pleased with the performance. Or you've identified a target behavior that is specific, that you've pulled out of the cluster of respect, responsible, and safe. So for example, I notice that I have a student that is starting to look upset about the algebra assignment. Can you believe it? He's starting to look upset. He's been on it for 10 minutes. My interval is 20 minutes long. How can I keep him engaged? Well, if I have this system, I'm going to go over and I'm going to say, wow, Joe, this is really hard work, and you've been on it for 10 minutes. That is so responsible of you. I'm going to give you 15 additional points. Thank you very much. What's that just done for his behavior? I gave him a little oomph. He's more likely to make the end of interval scale now. And as a consultant, it allows you to see that people are shaping behavior. What does shaping behavior mean? Reinforcing closer and closer approximations to an end goal. So it gives you a running record of the positive interactions between the student and the child. What we know from a lot of literature is there is a magic ratio of how many positives to how many corrections will cause children to do what you want them to do, and I'll hold that information till after break. So it is break time. We are coming to the most important part that I actually have to say today. This is what the aha has been for me in the last 3 years. So hang on, we're getting there. Debbie wants to point out that you will get your documentation of attendance as you leave when you give your evaluation form, and we're going to talk about that.
These will just be on the table outside. They don't have your name on them, so if you just needed it to show that you were, you'll pick one up.
And they'll be available at 3:45.
Right.
There you go. And if you would like to receive, you're not a cadre member and you would like to receive notice, then be sure that last page so that you're on the listserv is turned in. If you'd rather not, then don't turn it in. Okay, so I will. Evaluation forms are important, and we'll talk more about that. So to end the points sheet, you will see phenomenal changes in children as a result of this. Does every child in the class have to be on this? No, they don't. But there are some classes that really benefit from this. You have two payoffs. You have the payoffs for total bonus points, and most people run that as a student store or a buying of privileges. And then you have the other payoff, which is what's the word I'm looking for? Contingent access to activities based on whether or not you earned your 80. But there is going to be a little belief barrier, folks, and I want to thank Joe for bringing it up. Have I heard that concept that external reinforcers impair intrinsic motivation? Raise your hand if you've ever heard anybody say that. That is complete. See, I'm on film. That is completely not true. And we have 52 years of research on it. How do you like that? I have an article by MAG, which I have to get permission to disseminate. It's a copyright issue. That is a total meta-analysis of the literature on the use of extrinsic reinforcers and whether or not that impedes intrinsic motivation. Are you finding that your paycheck is impeding your motivation to work? How's that working out for you? All of us are motivated intrinsically and extrinsically, every human being. So our job is to not drink the Kool-Aid of either approach. A behavioral approach relies on reinforcement, but I'm not drinking that Kool-Aid. A cognitive approach relies on you know, developing the internal motivation. I'm not drinking that Kool-Aid either. What I'm saying is that both approaches, when combined, produce the most robust outcomes. So when we look at social emotional learning, teach kids how to cope and handle their feelings, teach them how to behaviorally activate so that they can enjoy reinforcement, then we have met their emotional needs. When I take a child with emotional disturbance and I give them training in social emotional learning, or if they need it, individualized CBT, I'm removing emotional problems from the equation, and now the child will be more responsive to reinforcement. Clay did a wonderful study recently, and that's where he took kids and he gave a screener for internalizer and externalizer, and he gave the externalizing kids PBS, which is reinforcement for following core rules, and he looked at outcomes in the next screener, and what did he see? The problem behaviors reduced. The kids responded to reinforcement of prosocial behaviors. Then he gave them SEL curriculum and looked at their response, and he found they did respond, but not as much as to reinforcers. Externalizing kids respond most to reinforcement, not to social, emotional, intrinsic. But then, smart man that he is, he put together both and gave the kids SEL and PBS combined, and he got an enormous response. So in other words, externalizers benefit from both. Then he took the internalizers, the kids who scored high on screening in internalizers, and he gave them PBS, and what did he find? No response. Nothing. Because when you're down and out, the world is not reinforcing. You have to get out of your funk in order for the world to be reinforcing. So PBS alone does not help internalizers. So he gave them SEL curriculum, and what did he see? Bingo! The kids with internalizing problems responded. However, they didn't respond as much as when you gave SEL combined with PBS. So what's the theory there? If you're down and out and you can get behaviorally activated through the SEL types of approaches or CBT types of approaches, then reinforcers are meaningful and you make even more response. So the take-home message, give all kids both. So we're not drinking anybody's Kool-Aid. What we're looking at is, what does the literature say? Where do we get our most robust change? So my last one that I'm most excited about, and so is about half the nation, is the brief behavior rating scales. And I want to talk about this one because to me this is the most exciting thing that ever happened in data analysis. Abbreviated rating scales that contain change-sensitive items and assess particular domains of emotional and behavioral functioning are what we're going to be hearing more about. And we have brief behavior rating scales in social skills, depression, anxiety, disruptive, inattentive, and aggressive behavior. And so what does this mean? In the Achenbach, in the Basque, you know how we rate kids as almost always or never in that full continuum? Some of the almost always are change-sensitive items, meaning if the kid gets better, that item will change. Others don't change. So researchers have gone through and looked at what are the change-sensitive items from all of this scaling we can do, whether it's the BIMAC or the all of the short, brief progress monitoring scales. So let's take a look at these rating scales that we have. The first one I want to look at is aggressive disruptive behavior. So find that one in your handouts, and it's on page 21. So page 21. So these are the change-sensitive items for a child who shows aggressive and disruptive behavior. But guess what, folks? Don't leave this laying around on somebody's desk. Rather, you would select this scale and then just put EDB in the bottom left corner, because you don't want Johnny's name to be on this while it's lying around. It's confidential issues, right? So look at the items on here. Threatened other students, was physically aggressive toward peers, bullied other students, instigated peers by teasing or saying put-downs, challenged your or other teacher's authority, was reprimanded for bad classroom behavior, argued with classmates, when corrected, argued, or became upset. So these are the items that are sensitive to change. So if I have a behavior plan for a child who has these kinds of behaviors, I might select as a progress monitoring tool this. I might get a baseline on it, and then I might determine what scale would be my goal. What would I be looking for? What would normalized behavior look like on this scale? Let's say, hypothetically, the child is receiving therapy, mental health therapy, or social emotional functioning therapy, whatever we want to call it. I need a measure to progress monitor the effects of that related service. Remember, a related service is a part of an IEP, and we should be progress monitoring whether or not this therapy is having an effect on the child's behavior. So this is really good feedback for the teacher to give to the therapist, for the parent to give to the therapist, and for our older kids, they can also do their own rating. So we're looking at what's the effect of treatment, regardless of what treatment we've selected, compared to baseline. So how often can the assessor fill this out? They can fill it out on a daily basis. They can fill it out on a weekly basis. There is no practice effect that will influence your data. So very useful tool. Let's take a look at social skills now. And I think I may have not got them in the right order. I'm sorry. Social skills is on page 24. So if I'm working in a pull-out social skills small group as a Tier 2 intervention, or if I'm providing social skills in the classroom, I want to monitor how this child is doing. These are the change-sensitive items that will change as a result of interventions. And so that typically takes a teacher a little under 60 seconds to complete. Let's take a look now at anxious behavior, which is on page 22. It's no longer appropriate for us to only deal with behavior that's externalized behavior, because children are capable of internalized behavior that's equally problematic, especially when we've been warned about an epidemic of internalizing behaviors. So here's one on anxiety. And if you look through some of the items, appeared stress about academic work, reluctant to engage in social activities, refrained from speaking in class, said he or she was feeling sick or hurt, was sensitive to criticism, seemed nervous or timid in the presence of peers, excessively worried about academic performance. Good change-sensitive items. Let's take a look at depressive behaviors. Again, you have to take the title off. Do not leave these laying around with that scale on it, calling it depressive behavior. So appeared sad or bummed out, seemed cranky, irritable, or agitated, was disinterested in schoolwork and other activities, appeared tired or worn out, had difficulty following directions, sulked or shut down, preferred to be alone during instructional time. Well, what about the student who did appear tired or worn out? Does that mean they're depressed? No, it's just that for children who have depressive issues, that one is change sensitive to when their depression lifts. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's take a look at inattention. And inattention is on page 25. So let's say I've selected a self-monitoring tool for the student. that I did my Tier 2 review and I decided, hey, look, frequently occurring inattentiveness. I'm going to select self-monitoring. How will I know if the child is getting better? He's self-monitoring, and periodically we're doing an honesty check, but that's really not enough. So instead, let's also use this change-sensitive item. What is too infrequent? Once a month. Doing it every day may not be the way to go in the initial stages of whatever the treatment is, but you may wish to go every day at a certain point, and then if you can see a trend, start fading it down to maybe once a week. And the therapists, if they're good, who are working with kids, let's say in outside treatment, are going to love you for this, because it's demonstrating whether or not the child is a responder. So you can establish local norms and baseline. I tend to just want to do baseline on the actual child for a bit and then use that as the norm rather than doing baseline norming on a whole group of kids. So a lot of different ways we can get that data. So when you establish the baseline, you can often do something like writing a goal that Brian will obtain an average score of 5 or less across the last 3 data points as measured by the brief behavior rating scale completed by his classroom teacher. Is that legally defensible? Honey, anything you graph is legally defensible. Any graphed anything is legally defensible because you're demonstrating ongoing teaming, ongoing progress monitoring, and these are easy to graph. You can get ChartDog off of Intervention Central, but actually the one that's now on PENT, on Forms, is really a stellar tool that was developed by some colleagues in Nebraska, and we've loaded it up there. So you collect your progress monitoring data, at least 1 data point a week. You get a minimum of 4 data points across 4 weeks before you can make any decision. And if you're doing direct one-on-one treatment for cognitive behavioral therapy, give yourself 6 to 8 weeks. At 16 weeks, we should be seeing a robust change, and if we're not, then problem solving needs to occur. And almost all of our mental health service providers are aware of this, that if you're not seeing robust change, then something's wrong. The problem that's occurred for a lot of our mental health service providers is they're documenting change based on what kids say in a treatment. That's not robust. What's robust is what happens when you get out there in the world. Did what happened in the treatment actually transfer out? So you input the data in Excel, and on the PENT website there is that simple program. It includes a document on how to graph data, and it's easy. And that's what it looks like, but the directions will tell you exactly what to put in each line. And it will create all of the standard deviations. It will compute an effect size on the intervention, and you are going to look good by having this amount of graph data. So here's a sample chart. Let's take a look at it for a minute. In Tier 1, the student was getting core reading. So this is an academic one. You can chart anything, behavior, academics, whatever. So in core reading, there was the baseline. Then we did supplementary reading, 30 minutes 3 times a week. Then we moved up to Tier 3 intervention. Take a look at the goal line. Take a look at the trend line. Discuss at your table, should I maintain? Should I modify? Should I drop back down a tier? Or should I go up a tier? Go ahead and talk about it at your table. I can choose to bump up. I can choose to maintain. I can ask questions about modifying whatever I'm doing, or I can go down. What's your vote? We got a lot of bump ups. Do we have any modifies? And if you were thinking about modifying, what would you be thinking? So what is the amount of time we're giving to it? What is the quality and the fidelity of whatever the thingy is we're doing? So either conclusion can be fine. How long did it take us to look at that graph data and come to that? Pretty short amount of time. And that's the kind of processing that you will see in the future. This decision making where we all get together and gripe about, well, what do you expect? He's one of the Miller boys and all that stuff is just not bringing us to where we want to go. So you're generating your graph line. And every one of us is going to get skilled at this. And then you're making those team-based decisions that we just talked about. So let's take a look at Sarah Smith for a minute. Here's Sarah. She's got a behavior plan. She's a first grader. She's an externalizer with temper tantrums. Her baseline is not so good. And now the goal line, this 80% of points on a daily report, is the red line. So what's your conclusion? Would you bump up, maintain, modify, or start fading down? What's your conclusion? I have, show me up high so we can see. Where are we? Some of us would like to start bumping down, which doesn't mean discontinue the intervention. It means start to fade it away, parts of it. Some of us would like to maintain because we feel like we haven't had enough days on it. But obviously, we're not choosing bump up, and we're not so sure we want to bump down. We're somewhere in the middle on that one. So now it's time for our last cafe chat. So what are the barriers to progress monitoring, the how and who that might solve the problem? Discuss the FAPE in an LRE, and discuss why counselors and psychologists doing therapy should select a progress monitoring tool. And let's just spend 7 minutes on that. I'll set my timer. All right, 4 comments on progress monitoring. If you have more, that's fine, but let's take 4 before we move into section 4. 4 comments, questions, clarifications, anything. Yes? Okay, so JP's talking about a little concerned about the subjective quality. Most of what we do is subjective. When it comes down to the Basque, it's subjective. When it comes down to the Achenbach, it's subjective, but it has been psychometrically shown that high scores in that are not indicative of a successful transition to adulthood, right? So these items are change sensitive, meaning they have been shown that if the child is getting better, that we will see change. If you need to, go in and do a fidelity check. So let's say Miss Wright just really wants to get rid of the kid. You know, she doesn't like him. It doesn't happen in this region, but there are regions of the country. I'm joking. So, and she knows that if she shows he's getting better, that you are likely to not want to consider that a more restrictive placement would be a good idea. Anybody following my thoughts? So, you're going to want to do some measure. Remember I gave you the slide on movement from, and when we consider LRE, the academic benefit, the social benefit, the degree of disruption, and the cost, that's like critical information for people to recognize. We don't go to restrictive settings because we don't like him. We go to restrictive settings because the content, methodology, and instructional strategies for this child cannot best be delivered in this environment and need to be delivered elsewhere. Yes, these are subjective, but we don't have anything that's objective. We don't have a blood test. We don't have any objective measure. They are change sensitive. I love the last series because those have such rich psychometrics behind it. They're published in the School Psych Review, and I believe it was in 12. And it was Dr. Gresham, Dr. Cook, and 2 other researchers that culled all the literature and then did the psychometrics to determine that these are the items that will change. There is another company now called the BIMAS, which is doing the same thing. They have a flexible scale, and they're looking at what are the most change sensitive. There are people around now who are suggesting that you go through whatever measure you used, an Achenbach, a Basque, and you pick out what the child scored high on. You know, he almost always does this and does that. And that's better than nothing, but some of the items you pick are not the change sensitive ones. So I say go with the ones that the research has shown will produce change, even though they're subjective. So I told him to ask those questions. That was great. Perfect. Another question. Well, that's what people have done. Let me repeat that. So there are people who've gone through the Basque, or they've gone through the Achenbach, they've gone through the SSRS, and they've picked those items that score as almost always, you know, the high indicators. And they've pulled those together and they've made a scale. But what I was saying over here was you will end up picking ones that don't change much as the child gets better. So you want to make sure that you look at what the child has scored high on if you've used one of those instruments, and look and see if it shows up on any of these scales. And yeah, absolutely.
And instead of using the full scale, you might say, okay, here's the ones that is really showing up high on. These are the ones I want to track, not every single one.
However, so the question is, should I just pick the ones that are really indicative of this child's functioning rather than pick the whole laundry list? Well, but these are the items that get better when the child gets better in a category. So social skills category, if I only picked where he scored at almost always, there will be some that scored as always. And I didn't get them, so I didn't see that now it's turned into a never. So it's kind of easier just to take these than spend time constructing an individualized one. But there's nothing to prevent you from doing it. But if you did and you didn't see change, then you'd have to ask the question, well, did I accidentally pick up ones that aren't particularly change sensitive? You're just making more work. But if you want to do it because it's fun, or, you know, I don't know, there's people without hobbies, you could, but the beauty is that this is there for us. It's already been done. But if you question, if you feel the child is getting better and the scale is not showing it, and you want to then experiment around, which is kind of my nature, then I'm going to pull out and say, well, how about on these, did he get better? So, but look at the overall category. Remember, take off the name of the category. So you can still call it a brief behavior rating scale, but please white out that it's for attention or it's for social skills or aggression, because you want to keep this a little bit less revealing laying around on teachers' desks. Okay, 2 more comments. Yes?
Can you tell us the ratio between positive and negative comments?
Oh, I forgot that one. How could I forget my main shtick? At the University of Washington, there was a marriage therapist who decided to film people in the waiting room who were there for marriage therapy. And apparently he had permission to do that, but I don't know. And so then he had graduate students go through and code what the interactions were like in the waiting room. And then he went back and found these couples 10 years later, and he found out that those couples who were engaging in a ratio of 5 positives to every 1 nag or correction were still married 10 years later. So then this has spread into business and education. When I go into classrooms to observe, the first thing I do is start collecting ratios. And if I'm there 15 minutes, it's not, if you're there less than 15, you haven't given it a good enough time. If I don't see 5 to 1 going on in a classroom, I know that this is a missed opportunity classroom. It's human nature not to pay attention to rule following because they're doing what you expected them to do. It's human nature to cut it out right now. I told you, cut it out. You, cut it out. You, cut it out. Is more the nature of how teachers try to keep all the balls up in the air. But that means they're not focusing on prevention. So 5 to 1 gets the job done. 5 to 1 ratios. Just altering the ratio of positive to corrections will change the behavior in a Tier 1. So, I mean, just that alone, it's one of our most powerful intervention. And I've done treatment, so is Dr. Cook, who I work with, where we just ask the teacher to go to 5 to 1, and then we have a para collecting ratios, or the teacher collecting ratios on the para together. I mean, doing it not as a punishment, but as a let's check our ratios. And we've come back 2 or 3 weeks later, and there's no problem behaviors to deal with. 5 to 1 gets the job done. Okay, thanks for the prompt on that one. One more? Do we have one more? Anybody got a question?
Can I ask you a related question?
Sure.
This 5 to 1. How does that work when you're dealing with a class? You count how many times you give it, or you talk about the particular students?
Okay.
I have 5 students, and I can get all those 4 positive, and that's the one I'm hitting every time. You know?
Right. Then that's when you're going to dig down in your data. So Clint's bringing up, what if the teacher is doing 5 to 1 ratios, but one kid is the scapegoat, and that one kid is the one that keeps getting the cut it out or the correction. Now we know we've got a problem. But we want to see 5 to 1 across the room, and for the problem student, we don't want to see 5 to 1. What do we want to see? How about 10 to 1? We don't have the statistics on a research basis of the ratio. Have you ever heard the saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer? What's that all about? It's saying the power of shaping and reinforcing and relationship.